All right.
And we're live.
Hey, everybody. How are you guys doing? Yeah, we're streaming on time this week. Great.
Yay.
But yeah, anyway, sorry for the vague title. For those who don't know, well, nobody knows. I don't know why. I guess I've just gotten into the habit of using that turn of phrase when I'm introducing subjects. I did it earlier tonight, actually, like in an actual conversation, accidentally. For those who don't know, I'm like, why am I talking like this is a video? but yeah. So I just found out about this a couple days ago. Rational outlaw. Okay, so this would actually be an appropriate use of that phrase for those who don't know. I'd imagine most of you do, but Rational Outlaw is he's a YouTuber who loosely associates with some of the libertarian communities that Heretic and I are also in. He claims to be a libertarian, although he self-identifies as a minarchist and is one of those Trump cultist guys. So he's a libertarian in the same way that Hoppe is a libertarian, which is uh, which is funny because he happens to be very fond of Hoppe.
Hmm. Gee, I wonder
Interestingly enough,
why.
well, probably because a lot of the after we put out our essay, yeah, actually this was starting before our essay. It was just when we started, when Heretic and I started openly expressing criticism of Hoppe and took the Aristotle pill. Um, yeah, they didn't like that, and I think it's still ongoing in some parts of these communities, but it started one of the biggest shit fits I've personally seen in the libertarian movement.
Well,
But what were we gonna say? I'm sorry.
yeah, I was just going to remark that I think Rational Outlaw would have a more favorable opinion of uh Hop for the same reason that I might have a few years ago. Not to say like I ever had a favorable opinion, but I think I've mentioned this in both off of stream and on streams that if I had found Hop a couple years ago when I was like first becoming an anarchist, I easily would have seen myself becoming a Hoppian. Fortunately, I know better now, but that's just it's something that honestly terrifies me to this day that I basically dodged a bullet. But
Oh,
the reason,
likewise.
but what it is that would have made Hop so appealing to me is that he's created a synthesis of libertarianism and conservatism, which I'm pretty sure everyone's at least vaguely aware that Rational Outlaw is very much of the Burkean, uh, what's it called? The Goldwater school of American conservatism, which is the belief in what they would call traditional values, traditional American values, belief in American exceptionalism, nationalism. Which, by the way, speaking of American exceptionalism, we'll be talking about that on Tuesday and Wednesday next week, so stay tuned for that. But
Long story short, shill for the government using paying lip service to the free market radicals of the 19th century, lick the boots of police, and fuck, I forgot. God damn it, I blanked on my
it's all
I
right.
blanked on what I was thinking, but
I think
yeah,
the audience got
you
the
get the
gist of the.
idea. You get the idea. He's one of those types of people who would probably well, no, he does. He thinks libertarianism is quote unquote smaller government, whatever that means. He is one of those political types, which by the way, that's as I've argued, that's a big part of the reason that Hoppe appeals to a lot of people when they're just being introduced to libertarianism. A lot of people, for a lot of people, anti-politics and sort of getting into the philosophical entailments of that and dealing with epistemology, uh, internal debate over the best way to study societies or what would be considered legitimate in the context of social organization. A lot of people are drawn to the discussion of politics as just a way to get more chicken tendies, a way to further their own perceived interests because they've been getting told their entire lives by the government schools that their interests can be met by a particular branch of politicians. So Hoppe comes along and says, not only is anti-politics invalid, but everything is political. That's a lot easier for them to accept. And it also means that they don't have to throw out a lot of their preconceived notions of what informs their principles, or even really make it so they have to get into the discussion of principles in the first place. Libertarianism, from that perspective, if you even want to be generous and call it that, can just be boiled down to, you can live in this community, and this community will quote unquote defend your rights. Well, let's be clear, it's not a community, it's a monopoly and arbitration disguising itself as like a community watch style group.
Oh, but
But
they're not a state. They're not a state though, because the social contract is an actual physical written contract. So therefore, it's completely okay. It's not a monopoly on arbitration at
those
all.
unilateral standards of contract.
I mean, yeah,
But anyway,
just because you're only a member of the contract because your property was encircled by the local warlord who basically forced you at gunpoint to sign the contract, and they get to dictate the terms of the contract and change it at any moment, and they get to initiate force against you and even threaten to enslave and murder you because anytime you disagree with them, they threaten you. They threaten you by saying that you are not demonstrating an understanding of division of labor, and therefore you are not properly speaking a person. Yeah, that's
yeah.
totally legitimate. But anyways, I did want to
Well,
get
it's all
into this
just
video
it's
like more quickly than we usually do. So
okay.
yeah,
Well,
more
it's all just
specifically about the
decided
video.
by all just decided by the policy of the covenant. So basically, it's exactly how they would argue for things now, except quote unquote privatized.
Hmm.
But
It's just
anyway, every once in a while, Outlaw takes shots at either Heretic and I honestly didn't even know about this video previously. Most of the time, I ignore them because he is just making arguments I've already refuted in past videos. And on top of that, I find a lot of his arguments, like, I'm gonna say this as nicely as I can, I find them to be dumb, kind of dumb. We'll put it like that.
mhm.
But yeah, so he made a response video um to the video that we put out in the earlier part of 2019, the truth about the Christchurch shooting, which the title's a bit loaded, but for those who haven't actually seen that video, the point we were making was that we were using the Christchurch shooting in order to showcase how the government radicalizes people by posing as people on 4chan and 8chan and deliberately inciting violence. And that was later, it was speculation here, and it was something that people had been speculating about for years, and we sort of pointed out inconsistencies in the whole story, um, about how initially there were two mosques, and in some versions of the official story, there are still two mosques that were shot up. And there was a video taken of the second mosque where there were like three people going in, and Terrence kind of has a weird background himself, but yeah, just aside from the history of that video, where a bunch of subhuman autists from Reddit raided that video and eventually got it falsely flagged. So if you want to see it, you can only find it on BitChute now. As just aside from that, there was an FBI document posted later in 2019 trying to. It was framed around monitoring activity on 4chan and radicalization. You want to pull this up on Stream Heretic?
Yeah, I was only able to get one of those screenshots. But basically, what happened is that this got proven to be true when, as part of that document, the FBI included a whole bunch of screenshots of their own postings on 4chan by complete accident, because, of course, they're incompetent and don't know how 4chan works. And so, yeah, their usernames are anonymized through through numerical or through numbers. But whenever you're on 4chan and you're looking at your own posts, every time the username anonymous will be followed by the italicized parentheses U, which you can see on here. And so the FBI basically just accidentally out themselves. And so what happened is that people went backwards and looked through a whole bunch of older threads and older posts with that particular user number. And what they found is that this user that was clearly added as an FBI agent was deliberately trying to be a provocateur, using rhetoric or using extremely inflammatory rhetoric, specifically to incite these people to violence.
So basically, what we'd argued in that video was categorically proven true.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so Rational Outlaw attempted to make a response to that, where I almost don't even know how to describe the type of arguments that he makes, because they're like, if it wasn't for the fact that we didn't have anything to talk about for the stream today, and I just was kind of scraping the bottom of the barrel, I probably would have never even said anything about this video. But yeah, I think we should get started. What do you think, Heretic?
Yep. And for those of you who, just a quick thing, for those of you who are curious why the quality of the screenshot is so freaking terrible, it apparently has something to do with the screenshot being printed out into like a physical printer and then being put onto a scanner, and then I assume being faxed over to where it was eventually scanned back into a digital format. And so what you basically have is like 2 to 3 to 4 layers of just quality deterioration. Hence why it looks like a 1950s Cold War document.
Because the government still apparently operates around the 1970s or 80s in terms of how they document things.
Mm-hmm. So anyways, yeah, let's go ahead and get started.
Governments do not function around individual ideological motivations. They simply do whatever is convenient for them at the time. This necessarily has to be the case because what motivates all governments is sustaining resources for themselves, and doing this always requires its economic influence to expand further in society through the implementation of more coercive restrictions.
That is false. Some governments shrink. Some governments shrink their control over.
Now, I think I know why he sped up the audio, and it's not to mock you, and like the same thing with the dogs as well. I think it's just to protect his own video from being flagged.
No, he shows actual clips from the the video later on. I don't know why he didn't use an actual clip here. I think he sped it up though, just for the sake of time. I'm gonna go ahead and guess. But anyway, yeah, so right off the bat, let's go over his two claims here. Governments can shrink. That's incoherent. It's incoherent to look at the ethical nature of a government in a scale based on size. First of all, there's no such thing as a small government or a large government, because there's no way to there's nothing that counts as a small or a large government. There's nothing that one would base their description of a government shrinking or getting larger off of.
And as you pointed out several times, I do apologize if I'm interrupting here,
no, it's fine.
But what you pointed out several times is that even when a government policy is repealed, like say that the United States federal government were to tomorrow remove marijuana from the list of banned substances, that would still not constitute any reduction in the size of government, since their ability to ban substances at all is still going to be in place. All that's really happened is that they're not using it to do that particular thing at this particular moment anymore. They still have the same amount of leverage that they did in the past. Nothing's really changed fundamentally. It's just that you probably won't be accosted by legislation enforcers as much for using this substance for now.
If they chose to, there'd still be nothing that you could do to stop them, and there'd be no way within their legal framework in order to defend yourself. Since you have a right to defend yourself in that circumstance, that means you got to buck the legal framework. Then that's the only logical conclusion you can take away from there.
Whoa!
And
sorry, your audio peaked there. Continue.
Oh, okay. And that's sort of, I guess, the first problem is that there's no way to. First of all, you can't just look at the government as being, in a vacuum. The reason political authority exists in society, or the amount or a basis for the amount of influence that political authority has, because another thing I've pointed out is that political authority is made up of several different organizations which operate as central institutions in any state society. There's, of course, the state, so the basic monopoly and arbitration and security, along with sort of the deciding factor of the policies implemented by all of the other state cartels. But then there's the finance monopoly, which is, the Federal Reserve. There's the monopoly on land, which is, of course, dictated by the government, but is also it's managed by Fed banks and some of the Federal Reserve's partners. What counts as a deed and how the deeds are enforced are decided largely by the financial partners of the government. And then, of course, there's the cartels on global trade, which attempt to determine, the rates at which certain supplies enter parts of different parts of the world, and attempt to, because they also have basically my point is that there's a series of cartels as well, which mutually reinforce one another and also work in a codependent relationship with the government. And when you look at how they function together, it's very obvious that this explanation of, well, the government exists and people like the government being there, therefore we just got to convince them the government should fuck off, and therefore that's how governments will be less powerful. That's obviously nonsense. And the worst part of that is I hear that from a lot of libertarians too, not people who claim to be minarchists or Hobbians. It's basically just a reverse social contract theory. It's the same principle of social contract theory, but in reverse. It's the same type of argument where the government exists because people want it there. And of course, what counts as belief or what counts as people wanting it to be there is incoherent. It's not tangible. So if there's no way to correct for that. If something happens, it can never be allowed to count against that theory. But yeah, getting on to the second point, if governments take away regulations or they lower tax rates, first of all, I want to know, like, under what standard you're considering that to be a quote unquote reduction of state power, because as I've also argued previously, given that political authority and the economic frameworks that they manufacture around around these institutions' interests, because they still have the same amount of power regardless. They still have, because of the monopoly infrastructure that the state has created, because they still have the same influence over your property, resources, over you and how you associate. Yeah, this doesn't really meaningfully impact the government in any sort of way in terms of what they can do to you as long as this infrastructure exists. And if you're going to look at how these regulations or how these changes in their tax rates affect these institutions, well, they can be beneficial. So I would argue is that that's just more the government operating in efficiency mode, or at least doing so to the extent that it's possible. From its perspective, at least. And so you shouldn't see the government as an organization that is just it has this mysterious, unexplained power that it obtains in a vacuum, and people are powerless to do anything against it. No, you have your rights. You have your ability to operate around it. It's not only not only can it not stop you if it doesn't know that you're doing that, or simply you choose to defend yourself and you outmight them. You compete with them, and you have your own security, your own community's security that's operating against the government. Not only are they powerless there, but also that would destabilize their infrastructure entirely. And that's another reason I suspect a lot of these political libertarian types are uncomfortable with that. Going back to briefly what we were talking about before the stream started. It's they don't understand how to associate in pursuit of one's own interest, which is sad because they do it all the time, or at the very least, they don't understand the political context behind that. Just what I'm going off topic, but just going back to characterizing political authority, it should be seen as a series of coherent organizations, as an interest that they all share, and something that reinforces that interest. Therefore, the way to undermine this is undermining what allows them to continue reinforcing their influence over society.
Mm-hmm.
Once
Don't
you
really have anything
understand,
to.
once you understand, I was just going to say, once you understand that the political framework of fake libertarianism and minarchy slash Hoppianism, it falls apart on a fundamental level.
I mean, I don't consider Hoppianism to even be a form of minarchy. I mean, that would be insulting to minarchists.
Yeah, fair
I,
enough.
I mean, is Marxism a form of minarchy?
North Korea is my favorite anarchy. It's a constitutional republic, which in its constitution guarantees everyone freedom of speech, the right to a fair trial, and freedom of association.
Mm-hmm. North Korea is my favorite Hoppian community covenant. Anyways, let's continue. Let's see what else he's got to say, because this is just him giving a prelude.
Economy. For example, Britain and the Scandinavian countries. They would have gone the way of Venezuela if they had not reduced their government control over their economies. So no, the government isn't always expanding.
I don't even know what he's. I don't even know what he's citing as the government reducing its influence over their economies. First of all, political economies are a construction of the state and its political partners from the start in
Oh
order to
wait,
try to.
sorry. I think I know where he's getting at. The point you made is that governments all have an incentive to always expand their control and leverage over people's resources, and he interpreted that to mean that the government is always getting bigger.
Yeah, and I was just about to address that. I don't think that from the start, governments can get bigger or smaller. So that's I'm going to go ahead and give him the benefit of the doubt and assume that's a misunderstanding. Although I think that that's kind of hard to believe, considering that I made a response to his video responding to a video I'd made earlier criticizing the concept of minarchy, and I brought up that argument in my response to him. I also had a debate with him where I presented that same argument and he was unable to address it.
I don't think he
I'll give him
understands
the
it.
give him the benefit of the doubt and assume that he's arguing in good faith, even though I honestly probably shouldn't, given that there's he knows that this is my position, and he is familiar with this argument, and he's had ample opportunity to respond to it. But yeah, assuming that that's the case, it's at best a misunderstanding.
Mm-hmm. Now, I'm going to try to explain it once again in such a way that hopefully, if he's listening or if he ever hears this, he'll be able to understand. So, Rational Outlaw, what SO is referring to in terms of the expansion of leverage refers to its ability to victimize people's rights and its capability to do so. What you're referring to in terms of how large and small government is a question of how much victimization is actively occurring in the economy, or not an economy, but in a political economy. Now, the two are related. That is, it is fair to say, but you two are referring to completely different things, and I think it would help your discourse with each other if you were to, you don't necessarily have to agree, but you should at least understand where SO and I are coming from in this regard. So hopefully
Well,
that clarifies a few things.
I'm also referring to the state victimizing people. It's just that it's just that he is only looking at this in an active sense in terms of the state um, directly threatening people when, of course, both you and I have effectively made the case in numerous different streams and videos that political authorities not it's ultimately always derived from victimization. Every expression of authority is not always directly the result of victimization. For instance, the barriers to entry created by the state, which make it so people have to enter into the wage system. You're not being coerced by your boss to work for a wage, and you're not coercing your boss into accepting your labor, but the state has used violence in order to make it so there are only a certain amount of resources available, and you can only use your resources in a certain set of ways. Therefore, that is a position that exists because of political authority, and it benefits political authority greatly. As noted earlier, the state loves making it as difficult as possible to get out of the political market and the small handful of firms that you can operate around in their political market, because they want to manage your resources more efficiently, and they want to be able to have more knowledge in what transactions you're engaging in.
All right. Anyways, let's continue. Intro time.
Hey, you!
Oh my god, is it still going?
I thought he fixed that problem.
What
Yeah,
the? How old is this video?
It's not even that old. Let me check really quick. Yeah, it was just uploaded in August 19th.
That's like a
So,
channel trailer, not a intro to your video. You usually want to keep that, like, even 5 seconds is long.
yeah, Shane criticized him on this point, like back before he even had the furry Sona, where yeah, he just had, throughout his channel's existence, has had these obnoxious, like, 2-minute long intros, and yeah, it comes off as being very pretentious, but also it's annoying. I'd honestly rather get hit with a Raid Shadow Legends ad.
Yeah. Anyways, we're
You've
past
all
it now.
probably heard what happened by now or seen the live footage of it because the shooter streamed the entire event live on Facebook. You've probably heard a number of different takes on the event by now in regards to every aspect of the shooting from the mainstream media, all of which seem to be strangely uniform in character, which is incredibly odd because they're almost all lies or misrepresentations. Like how there were actually 3 shooters reported by eyewitnesses, though Terrence's live stream doesn't show any additional shooters, and this account can be confirmed by a video taken by a bystander of 2 people shooting up a different mosque in the same area, a picture taken of police with someone who's clearly not Brenton Tarrant on the ground in handcuffs.
There's a problem with eyewitness testimony. It's eyewitnesses.
Bruh, there's a video of it. Oh, and
Yeah.
by the way, nice of you to conveniently cover up the video that was being shown with pictures, so that you wouldn't have to explain that.
It's funny because, like, if you're gonna censor the video for the purposes of not getting the video you're making in reply get taken down, which would be completely understandable, then you would, want to be consistent about it. Instead of showing 1, 2, 3 second clips, and then the rest of it is just like a picture of a dog. You're clearly trying to hide something, and it's extremely disingenuous.
He did this to you too, didn't he?
Yes, he did. He cut out entire parts. He cut out, like, this was in reply to the video before I merged my channel with yours and we formed the Backalley. I did a 2-part video series called Cops Are Not the Good Guys, and he did a reply to that, which ended up turning into reply to reply to a reply to a reply to a reply, but he would cut out entire parts of my arguments just so he could take what I said completely out of context and not, even though, like,
So
if you continue that clip for like 2 or 3 more seconds, I would explain what I meant very clearly.
yeah, and he took part of what you were saying out, so that he could make an argument which literally in the next sentence you go on to address.
Hmm.
Yeah, it looks like he's up to his same old rational outlaw tactics of trying to, even though I mentioned there's a fucking video of it, he decided that I guess that if he blocked out the clip that was in question, it would seem as though I was just talking about things that random people had seen.
And I think I mentioned this before. Of we've replied to videos that are replies to other videos, and something that we occasionally observe is that they'll take a clip completely out of context and then reply to it as though, or in the context that they're trying to manufacture by clipping it in a certain way. This is a thing that Marxists do, and it's extremely, extremely disingenuous. I don't know why he does it. I mean, I would just think that even a conservative would be embarrassed about taking a clip out of context instead of replying to the clip as the person who is presenting the information intended for it to be interpreted. I
'Cause
personally I am very paranoid about making sure that I'm understanding something correctly, and will at least attempt to do my due diligence to make sure that I'm understanding and interpreting it correctly, so that when I'm replying to a position, I have appropriately steel-manned it sufficiently. But
yeah, I can't. That's a big part of the reason why it takes me like a month to write videos now, is because I can't. I go over basically every single word in any essay that I write to make sure that it's technically accurate and is not in any way misrepresentation of the particular views that I'm talking about. And Rational Outlaw, he's one of those people who gets an idea in his head of what he wants. He wants the conclusion he's arriving to be, and he'll cut out things, or he'll misrepresent arguments in order to try and arrive at that conclusion, which is another reason why I am kind of hesitant to give him the benefit of the doubt, because I'm almost 100% certain, because this is a pattern with him, that anytime he does this, it's not in good faith.
not really have anything to add to that. Let's just continue to see what else he has to. Let's see what other clips he takes. How other clips he takes this video out of context for. Which, speaking of which, there is a thing about this video that annoys me, like really annoys me. But well, it's a bit meta, but we'll get into it a little later.
Are often very wrong. And since the media is reporting on the same thing, of course it's gonna probably sound very similar, or that it's gonna sound almost word for word for each news station or newspaper, because they're reporting on the same topic. And the news media
It's not what I was
also
talking
gets it.
about. I was talking about the narrative. You can report on the same story using different narratives. Hey, heretic, I guess James Corbett and the US government are promoting the same information when they're talking about 9/11, because they're both talking about they're both presenting the same information.
Huh. I hadn't noticed that before, but now that you mention it, yeah, I suppose that James Corbett and the CNN are saying the exact same things about 9/11. Everything that they say makes And not only that, but they just straight up sound like the same thing. It's like they copy pasted an audio recording and are just regurgitating it on their own platforms respectively. I mean, come on, don't be ridiculous.
All
Anyways, I
movie
think we should continue.
reviewers, all content reviewers have the exact same opinions whenever they're talking about single subjects because they're talking about the same subject. That's just fucking brilliant. But yeah, let's continue.
Things wrong a lot. And why is it that all three of you happen to not post any of your sources? Even when I went
Because
to
they were
check
posted
YouTube-
in the pinned comment on the YouTube video, which again was falsely flagged by a group of basement dwellers.
Yeah, that was a thing that happened, and I remember getting a crap ton of crap about that. We definitely did post the sources. I'm pretty sure if I was asked, I could track them down. But yeah. Anyways, let's continue.
YouTube channels that have had months to put your sources, you still didn't put your sources. So pretty much everything in your video is questionable.
Oh, but those were the Nazis. The US government would never do that. The Gulf of Tonkin incident that got the US into the Vietnam War never happened, for one.
According to my sources, it was a misinterpreted report. And this report is what led President Johnson to take action. But I will give you that historians are in still debate about whether Johnson was telling the truth or not. Or if he
Nigga,
just-
that was the fucking point.
I'm kind of speechless about this.
That's why the Gulf of Tonkin incident was significant. The U.S. intelligence, I think, tried to blame it on the Vietnamese, even though the missile which actually sunk the ship was shot by Israel, and Israel was working together with the intel agencies, and the Johnson administration used that as a pretense for continuing the war. I can't recall if it had started at that point or not.
It hadn't, but if I recall correctly, the United States was involved in Vietnam, but it was like incredibly limited extent, where you basically just had a 1,000 or so troops on the ground at the time. They were operating as quote unquote advisors for South Vietnam, but afterwards, after the Gulf of Tonkin incident, you had a significant escalation where you had six figures numbers of troops deployed there. And yeah, the whole Gulf of Tonkin incident was exactly as I was describing. It's the whole point of bringing that up is just to illustrate that, yes, the United States government does, in fact, use false flags to get the to drive U.S. U.S. foreign policy and U.S. public opinion in certain directions. They do, in fact, engineer news to manipulate people and to manipulate people's perception of reality, which is, well, exactly what you just illustrated for me quite clearly. Yeah. Now,
So
whether or not Johnson was being truthful or not is not terribly important, because we know with absolute certainty that the incident was set up to be a false flag, and it's very easy for intel agencies to simply not tell the president this just to create a veneer of plausible deniability.
Yeah, that's all that I was going to say. The point here was for people who think that it's outlandish that the government could be radicalizing people using the Chans. Government has done or planned far more outlandish things previously. Things which are significantly more outlandish and are currently on a systematic basis, if you want to really get down to it, are doing things worse than that almost constantly. Whether if you want to look at the military occupied regions of Africa and the Middle East right now, or if you want to look at medical kidnapping and the CPS run child sex trafficking rings.
Well, I mean,
both of
unfortunately,
which, both of which we've made videos about before.
and unfortunately, because I've been talking about this before the stream starts, I think Rational Outlaw has a conflict of interest when it comes to the United States that gives them a giant ass blind spot in regards to the atrocities that the United States government is or engaged in previously and is currently engaged in. Probably because he has family both among the cockroaches and in the military. Which he can confirm or deny this. I don't know, but it just seems to me that that's the case. But anyway, should we continue?
Yeah, sure.
All right.
Simply took advantage of this situation. So you can't really fully take it one way or the other. But since there is no solid evidence to say that he did do this purposefully, then we have to assume that he is innocent.
Operation Northwoods was a program during the Cuban Missile Crisis to have the CIA flight airplanes into US skyscrapers, then blame the attack on the Cuban government.
I distinctly remember in that clip putting up the document on screen so for people to read for themselves.
Yeah, you're gonna love how he responds to it. This is about where I stopped watching the video and decided if that at some point it's sort of at the bottom of the barrel, but at some point I may want to address it for the sheer sake of entertainment.
Yeah, by the way, that's not a. And by the way, just to respond to Wolfie in the comments, that's not a flag in the background, that's a blindfold.
Let me take a look at this. Oh, yeah.
That's
All right.
It's a blindfold. Anyways, continuing.
Which never happened because they never went with it. The president was strongly against that and he thought it was crazy. But oh no, you're just gonna leave out that factor, aren't you?
Because it's actually not true. And that's typically how Operation Northwoods gets spun by, Mockingbird Media. Sure, but actually, Kennedy's response to Limnitzer is publicly available. And Kennedy's response was not the moral outrage that, it's portrayed as. He actually just was against it because he thought that it could be tied back to the American intel agencies too easily. And he even gave Limnitzer the opportunity to redraft it. And after not being able to do so, Limnitzer was fired from the Joint Chiefs of Staff. But again, this doesn't really change the point that you were making, which is that the government regularly does outlandish things in pursuit of its interest that make browsing the chance to try and radicalize incels look tame in comparison.
And JC Armitage asks, why would he need to censor a document? It's because it undermines the point he is trying to make about us, as well as as well as his ability to mischaracterize our content. So yeah, he is censoring a document for completely disingenuous reasons, and we talked about this previously. You probably just joined the stream. So, anyways, let's go ahead and hit continue some more. So let's see what we say here.
Operation Mockingbird detailed the infiltration of US media by the CIA to program Americans' perception of reality. The fact that some of you watching this video right now might be thinking we're just a bunch of conspiracy theorists shows you just how successful they've been, because guess who coined the phrase conspiracy theory?
No, the CIA did not coin the phrase conspiracy theory. The first use of conspiracy theory was in 1870.
Plus, we know
that is a misrepresentation of the point that you were making, although I'll admit you probably could have phrased that a little better.
I agree. I shouldn't have used the term coin the phrase, but they definitely utilized that phrase in exactly the way I described. And all he's really trying to do is just say that one misuse of the term coined undermines everything I said previously when he has no ability, which is just evidence that he has no ability to refute everything I said about Operation Mockingbird, which is absolutely completely accurate. that the CIA did use and popularize the term conspiracy theory specifically to undermine people who, at the time, were skeptical of the official narrative in regards to the Kennedy assassination, but has since been utilized to and expanded to people who are skeptical of any official state narrative.
Essentially, anything that the government tries to promote as a narrative, if you're skeptical of it, you can't just be wrong. And they can't address the substance of your arguments. You're a conspiracy theorist. And the term conspiracy theory, even though it is a neutral description that literally just means somebody who is theorizing that there might have been a conspiracy, which is it's funny also to see that term get thrown around when it's not even contextually accurate. But
I mean,
But-
what was, I can't remember the last time I argued that there was a conspiracy for anything.
Yeah, competing narratives that attempt to explain some aspect of reality are not conspiracy theories. You just don't have the ability to handle a competing attempt to explain some aspect of reality. But literally, this is used to try and discredit scientific theories. People who are just questioning methodology or are attempting to put forward a competing understanding of epistemology in the sciences. But yeah, the point that you were making is the CIA has agents in every media outlet in order to control the stories that they're promoting and to control what's being written in the news.
This is all factually true, by the way.
This is factually documented in the programs going on to this day. Even if it wasn't, though, that's not the only way that the government directly controls the media. There's both the FCC and the FTC, which control the assets of all these media outlets, but also explicitly are there to control what can or can't be presented through radio or television airways. There is the Council on Foreign Relations, which pretty openly is just a panel for various media agencies that are connected with the government around the world to discuss domestic propaganda strategies. They have several talks about this, which they've openly streamed online. And there's, of course, there's a branch of the there's an executive branch of the U.S. government. There's a part of the executive branch, I should say, which literally their only purpose in existing is to create domestic propaganda for the government. It's called the Undersecretary of Public Affairs. So literally, the U.S. government has a propaganda ministry.
Sounds about right. Anyways, let's continue.
We know of other false flags in our modern day. The previously mentioned Parkland High School shooting.
It wasn't a false flag.
Yes, it was. I mean, do I need to list all of the inconsistencies in the official narrative? I mean, for one thing, the what's it called? The mainstream media was on the case, like right away. They were there before even the cockroaches were. You have
there were articles posted about the shooting before the shooting even happened.
You have a lot of witnesses who were. You have multiple witnesses. I'm sorry, people who were allegedly involved in the shooting who were in 3 different places at once when the shooting was going on. You had mass shooting drills that were taking place shortly before the shooting started. You have, of course, that video you posted where the what's his name? the shooter was being wheeled into the hospital on a gurney, except there was no one on the gurney.
Yeah, nobody was on the gurney.
There's the fact that they had this whole this whole like mass marketing and media operation for Daniel Bohr ready to go like right away to try to get or try to ban gun ownership. He would, and yeah, Daniel
There's
Bohr was JC Armitage just in the comments saying Daniel Bohr wasn't even at the school when the shooting happened, right? Well, that's what I mean. Like he's the one who's in 3 different places simultaneously. He was huddled in a what's it called? Huddled in his economics class. He was hiding in a closet, and he was riding his bike on his way to school as the shooting was going on because he was working for a school paper. Not to mention that there's videos of students seeing Daniel Bohr in their school as a student, and it's like, what the hell? Who is this guy? He's not here. And Daniel Bohr's just like laughing, just like trying to roll his eyes, like this guy's 25. Like who the hell is he?
Yeah, and those were all taken before the shooting. Just what I was going to say is, yeah, then there's also how the government responded to it, not by which I mean the police department of the area, that was such a big fucking red flag that the government had to try to create a controlled op narrative around that because people wouldn't stop talking about how the police just sort of waited outside until the fucking shooter decided to come to them, essentially. Yeah, there's such an insane amount of evidence that the narrative being promoted by the state around the Parkland shooting is absolute bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
So is that all that Rational Outlaw is going to say about it?
Yes, because as you can see, yes, that's literally all he said, and I knew this because he transitioned to the dog pictures right away. So he has no counter narrative to our narrative, and no ability to refute anything that I said.
No, not even an attempt to explain why that's wrong or what exactly would explain away all of these inconsistencies and apparent time anomalies.
Now, he might go into this here, maybe, because this might be a chance for him to redeem himself. Let's see, but I'm not going to hold my breath.
CIA funded soldiers in t-shirts burning an aid truck in Venezuela, then blaming it on the Venezuelan military.
That also did not happen. And
Yes, it did.
It literally did, and there's didn't you put a picture of it on the screen right there?
Yes, I did, which is why he put that picture of a dog on it, because if he can't show the evidence that I'm going to be putting on the screen, then he doesn't have to address it, which means that he doesn't get to be wrong. Yay!
Fucking embarrassing, even for him. Holy shit.
Yeah, I remember I remember only remarking on that because we talked about it on a stream not too long ago. And yeah, that whole incident was just freaking hilarious. Let's see what else he has to say.
The article that you show in your video says nothing that the US government was behind it.
What the article showed is that the incident was linked to the soldiers in. What the article shows is that the incident was linked to the soldiers in t-shirts, which is extensively documented to be in a CIA front group.
Heretic, it's confirmed. Article didn't say anything about it being tied to the US government, therefore it couldn't have been.
Oh, right. Yeah, I forgot.
Exposed.
Oh, I like this comment by Patrick Rooney.
How will we ever recover?
Oh, anyway, we're finished. Patrick Rooney said Rational Outlaw is a conformity theorist.
I like that, conformity theorist.
Yeah, I think we'll be using that from now on. Anyways,
Yeah, especially when I put out my essay on conspiracy theories, which will be up sometime in early 2021.
hopefully.
All
Anyways,
right.
It only says that the media lied about Maduro did it. It did not say that the US government was behind it.
But what would they have to do with New Zealand, you might ask? Why would the US government be involved? New Zealand is part of the Five Eyes, an intelligence alliance formed during World War II that includes the US, Canada, Britannistan, Australia, and, you guessed it, New Zealand. Officially, the alliance is intended to share intelligence and information.
And that's incredibly important when you factor into account how New Zealand's government is handling the shooting. Since New Zealand's intelligence agency is working directly with the CIA, MI5, ASIS, and CSIS in regards to the exact same agendas in international politics, taking this into consideration, it's eerie to see New Zealand's mass criminalization of speech and expression and crackdown on the already limited ability for its citizens to obtain guns, seeing state-managed and funded media outlets in all 5 of the countries in question parroting the exact same narratives, and that mainstream social media companies which have their terms of service written by governmental bodies are funded by the CIA in the case of Google, and
Google used to be funded by the CIA, but it's not anymore.
all of them are
But
bruh.
okay, yeah, so he's apparently just going to ignore all of that. But it's literally it's an organization that was started by the CIA and was funded by through a front group of the CIA called InQtel. And a lot of their staffers are CIA agents, and that's something Google's even publicly talked about.
I mean, it's a straight up revolving door between the executive and high ranking positions in all Silicon Valley tech giants, not just Google, and various government agencies, including intelligence agencies. It's very common.
But he's not going to address anything.
No, because all you have to do is just say "Oh, in QTEL, that's not it, they don't have CIA in their name, therefore they're not CIA at all."
No, you're wrong. Media says that the media doesn't say anything about the government being here, therefore the government had nothing to do with it. You're wrong. No.
Good lord, this is very special.
No,
Also, happy birthday to Digi's mom.
Oh, yeah, happy birthday. I hope that, hope she enjoys her day. Yeah, on that note, I want to comment about the title of this video, False Flags Debunked. The concept of false flags, apparently that's not a valid concept.
Apparently not.
The government manufacturing an incident, whether or not it actually is a crisis, portrays it as a crisis in order to try to normalize the government drastically changing how it conducts itself in society. That concept doesn't exist, apparently.
I distinctly remember listing several false flag incidents that the United States was involved in. Among them were the sinking of the Lusitania, as well as the attack on Pearl Harbor.
Yeah,
I wonder why he didn't address that.
I was about to actually ask whether or not he'd cut part of what you'd said there, because it's been a while since I've actually watched this video, especially since it's on BitChute now, and it's not even BitChute is so abandoned that it's not even called the Backalley anymore. But it's not even called the Backalley. But yeah, it sounded like you weren't done talking. And there was like a cut. I wasn't sure if that was how it was edited or whether or not there was more there that was cut out. He's done that before, so it wouldn't surprise me, but I'm not going to necessarily accuse him of that here because, I don't know. I don't remember.
I mean, sometimes I do splice together audio, particularly when I'm editing my own audio, and there'll be times where when I'm doing a raw recording, I'll repeat a phrase or I'll repeat a sentence because I stumble on some words or I don't think that I sound just right. But when I do that, I try to make it sound as natural as possible, and I don't do any of those like strange jump cuts where you hear that sudden change in tone where it sounds like the audio was clearly spliced together. And even when like we're doing collaborations, which I usually do the editing on, and there will be times where your sentence will begin immediately after my own. But what I usually do there is I include like a quarter second or a half second pause of just dead air just to give the listeners a bit of a break in terms of sentence so they can digest the information that was previously given to them, and then it sounds natural enough to transition over to the lines that you give. So I genuinely believe that he is trying to cut the audio and splice it together in such a way to make what we're saying sound worse than it actually is.
Well, if you look up esoteric entity on BitChute, you can find this video. We're sort of nearing the end of our time as is, so I don't think we are going to do that. And again, it would be kind of awkward to do that on stream. But I mean,
There's really no point.
Feel free. What was that?
I just said there's no point.
Feel free to tell us later in the Discord if you're interested in checking whether or not Heretic had more to say there. Let's check the chat and see if anybody is.
I'm willing to keep playing for like 2 or 3 more segments.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah, sure. Let's continue.
Let's see what else he's got to say.
Massively subsidized by the U.S. government.
You mean the U.S. government's subsidies that come from cities and states, not the federal government.
Recall the Parkland High School false flag.
That's kind of the point, though, is that they're all part of the same organization, so they have shared interests, which they work to mutually reinforce.
Not to mention that the United States federal government heavily subsidizes state and local government, so there's really no real actual difference.
But Heretic, they're legally declared to be 2 different districts.
Yeah, so I guess the United States government has no jurisdiction in the state of Florida whatsoever. Anyways, let's. I'm curious to see how he replies to you bringing up the Parkland incident.
I found an article from Every Town for Gun Safety's website, which according to Google's XML sitemap was posted an hour and a half before the shooting started. The only way that could have been possible is if the writing staff had advanced knowledge of the event and what would have happened. Here, we not only have one article from one website, but several posted days before the event in question. Someone might chalk this up to a computer glitch, but one that's consistently shown on multiple websites? No.
New Zealand is 16 hours ahead of the East Coast, and
It's on global time, you fucking idiot.
Even then, let's take his claim at face value. 16 hours. Let's look at the dates a bit. Let's look at the dates one more time. All right, we got.
Isn't this about the Parkland shooting?
No, this is about the Christchurch shooting. So, actually, let me just look up something real quick.
Google sitemaps are based on global time. It's not the time zone is not going to change. What the fuck, dude?
All right, so I'm looking it up right now.
Plus, Every Town for Gun Safety is a US-based organization, so why would their servers be based on New Zealand's time zone?
The Every Town for Gun Safety sitemap has their dates based on Greenwich Median Time, which it says so on the sitemap. So it's right there. You can tell, which is how I know that they happened and that the article was posted an hour and a half before the shooting even happened. But according to Wikipedia, the date for the Christchurch shootings was March 15th. Whereas, and I had to look that up because I couldn't quite recall off the top of my head. But if you look at the dates on the dates on the Google sitemaps, you have March 13th, March 13th, March 11th, March 12th. Which even if
Some
we
of
take the
them
claim that
were-
this is even if we take the claim that 16 hours would somehow break the Google sitemap somehow, if we were to take that as completely accurate, I would think that March 11th, 2019 was more than 16 hours prior to March 15th, 2019. Just saying.
Yeah, and that's a good catch because I recall that now, but I didn't even remember that off the top of my head. Yeah, some of these articles were like written but privated, and then only made public after the shooting. But yeah, some of them were made days before the shooting even happened.
Hmm. And this isn't uncommon either. I remember after 2016 or after the 2016 general election that it came out that there were a lot of articles that were written in advance in assumption that Hillary Clinton would win the presidential election. And so we know that the media does write articles in advance of an incident in anticipation of it. It stands to complete reason that they have advanced knowledge of something happening that they would write an article. And typically it's standard procedure for in any and this is not just on news sites, but any site that features written content that you would have it saved on their back end as a draft. Or at the very least you could publish an article in advance, but the article would not be listed anywhere. However, the metadata of that article would still be present, and places like Google Sitemaps would be able to tell that it was published on a date. In this case, people got a little bit too overzealous, didn't realize that people were paying attention and looking for that specifically. And as a result, well, yeah, they kind of outed themselves a little bit.
Didn't cover their tracks good enough.
Mm-hmm. It's I like what Omen Rose said. Time zones let you time travel. I mean, that's like the first Superman movie style of understanding of how time zones work. But anyways, let's go back to this and see how he tries to dig himself out of this little hole he dug for himself.
Multiple websites? No.
New Zealand is 16 hours ahead of the East Coast, and I cannot find the sources that supposedly were published on the 12th, the 11th, or the 13th. I have only found one source that says, oddly, the 13th. But that...
I mean,
Their site, you could go to their site maps, and we posted pictures of them again on screen, and you covered them up with pictures of dogs.
yeah, he is. This is unbelievably disingenuous, and I'm strongly considering rescinding the thing I said I wouldn't do before the stream started.
Do it. Do it. Do it.
Let's save it to the end of the stream.
But that could just be simply a glitch in the system. It doesn't necessarily mean that they were all conspiring with the government. That is not
Already went
solid.
over that. It's multiple different servers. Stuff like that doesn't happen. And why would it just be media sites? Even if you were to go completely insane, why would it just be media sites? Why would it just be media sites who happened to be reporting on the Christchurch shooting and happened to be Mockingbird assets?
Evidence.
Following the
No,
exact same
at a certain
trends.
point,
It's no
At
Sorry.
a certain point, you can just use Occam's razor to weed out certain explanations, especially when those explanations run into conflict with understanding of how servers work.
I mean,
Okay,
I've already explained how this works from the website backend, and there are plenty of very good reasons why it would show up that way. And I can tell you that websites like WordPress do give as a default setting when you publish an article or publish any kind of content on a website, it would default to the date that it's posted. This isn't like something where websites would default to 3 days ago.
Then he also mentions, well, there are no articles posted by any media sites which say that any of these articles were posted a couple days in advance.
And then he cites one right here saying that he found one from March 13th, which even if all of the ones we did find were fake, except for the one that he found, that one is still evidence of exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah, and again, if you look at their site maps don't change with whatever updates are made to the article. Their site map will document the day they were posted.
Mm-hmm. Anyways, continuing.
Solid evidence.
Following the exact same trends. It's no wonder that you're seeing all of these new, massively expansionist laws being proposed in all 5 of these countries. Given that specifically all 5 of the countries in the Five Eyes intelligence partnership seem to be acting upon and expressing a uniform narrative with the exact same strategic misdirection and propagation of the exact same bold-faced deceptions, along with targets of censorship and legislation, this seems to suggest that the governments in question are cooperating with each other in an overarching strategy which, given what's happened in New Zealand and Australia so far with how their government has began to arrest people for simply talking about the Christchurch shooting, this sets the tone for a somewhat grim future in the Five Eyes nations. Grim, but predictable if you're familiar with the inherent function of the state and what motivates it to operate. But as we all know, and I've elaborated on in great detail in the past, see my video on late-stage statism, governments do not function around individual ideological motivations. They simply do whatever is convenient for them at the time. This necessarily has to be the case because what motivates all governments is sustaining resources for themselves, and doing this always requires its economic influence to expand further in society through the implementation of more coercive restrictions.
That is false. There are
So
two
that's-
things wrong with that statement.
That's the full context of the clip that this video opens with. That makes it even worse because I'd given multiple ways in which governments have how government agencies and governments have shared interests with one another.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I'm talking about making a claim of principle. I'm attempting to explain like what the real function is, contrasted with the explanation he's providing here. Of, well, no, they can just write down on a piece of paper how many resources they'll have or the influence over society they have. The fucking fact that politicians can just decree that something will be defended the way that it is suggests and whether or not that thing within the legal framework of society will even be recognized that way or defended that way suggests that they have an unaccountable monopoly. The fact that that's how they operate, the fact that that's how governments operate suggests that in and of itself. No, just going to ignore that and say, well, no, that's not how governments work. Governments work this way. Not even attempting to explain what's wrong with my position, my perspective, and nor does he even try to provide any counter evidence or anything which would better explain the observation that I'm making.
I mean, he's not going to, and I don't think he wants to, because if he were to actually examine everything that you're saying, try to not even an attempt to understand it, but just an attempt to steelman it to make his position look better, I think he would realize that a lot of his positions don't really have any logical basis and that everything that you're discussing actually has significantly more explanatory power than any of these other narratives that he's been spoon-fed his entire life. I should say force-fed his entire life.
I do recognize he probably doesn't understand that politics actually is not some separate thing from all other types of social organization, organization theory, principle, or in any sort of methodology in making claims about reality, because that's what pro political philosophies suggest,
Mm-hmm.
that the state is just it can do anything, and what it does is just dependent on policy, quote unquote. So I think he's obviously operating from that assumption, but and I think that may be what is informing his intellectual dishonesty. But there's no question here that he's being intellectually dishonest.
I had forgotten actually how disingenuous irrational copsucker could be, but
Yeah, same.
this
I would have
is
mentioned it before we started if I had remembered it.
yeah. I didn't quite remember, but seeing it happen again, it's just sort of like, good lord, man, do you not feel the least bit embarrassed about deliberately misrepresenting your opinions, or are you so delusional and so irrational and so copsucker that you just actually believe that that's the actual context of everything we're saying? I actually don't know. I don't know. Any other
Anyway,
closing thoughts?
continue.
No, we were just about to wrap up the
Not
stream.
necessarily, but I think that may be why he's being disingenuous. Is he's operating from a perspective which literally suggests that the only thing that matters is what the state does, and that's why a lot of people in politics are grifters. By the way, like not even politicians, but just people who promote certain political allegiances. It doesn't matter what means they use if it could influence policy, quote unquote, which again is just whatever they consider to be a means of influencing policy, is just completely up to their own interpretation. Then they'll do that, and they'll not think twice about it.
No, I don't think they will. But anyways, yeah, I do gotta get going. So yeah, thank you everyone for stopping by, and we'll see you on Tuesday or Wednesday. Bye.
It's kind of sudden.
Yep, sorry. You didn't really plan for this to end very